Hey everybody, Chris Anthony, Streams Live Podcast coming to you live. We are streaming to YouTube. We are streaming to Facebook Live and to Twitch. And I've been out for a while. Been out for about a month, so it's good to be back, feeling good, ready to rock and roll, and just want to get back in the swing of things again. Today's podcast, the biggest secret in your life. I was thinking about this morning. I was thinking about what's the most unheard of conversation we should be having in the vein of spirituality and just bettering ourselves. And I was thinking about it. I was like, you know what? The conversation I want to have is basically, you are free. And, you know, one of the biggest influences in my life has been the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras are very powerful, small, short sayings from the East. Patanjali was behind the sutras. And I want to start off with if any of you have read Eckhart Tolle, Eckhart had an amazing illustration on the beginning of his famous book, The Power of Now. In The Power of Now, he said, there was a man who sat in the center of the city, and he was a beggar. And he sat right in the center there, and he sat on a wood box, and he was begging. And he kept asking for alms and anything he could to survive. So this guy was always begging to everyone. And this one man saw him begging and said, incidentally, what are you sitting on there? And the beggar said, well, I don't know. It's just an old box. What difference does it make? Can you help me out here? You know how it is. I've helped out a lot of people. And, you know, sometimes it's the fast exchange. You know, you're at a stoplight or something, turning left, and you some bills out the window real quick and help the guy out. But this guy was asking questions. He's like, hey, what is it you're sitting on? The beggar was not really quite sure why he's asking the question, because when it came down to it, when the beggar finally looked in that wood box he was sitting in, he found out that there were jewels, a treasure chest on the inside of that box. So, fascinating point of the story is that the box is like us. Within us is a treasure chest of wonder. So that's what I kind of want to pierce today. When I think about our lives and who we are and where we're at as a global society, as a community of people, is there a possibility that deep down inside of us is a treasure chest of wonder? That's what I'm after. So this is Streams of Light Podcast. I'm Chris Anthony, and I want to look at the treasures within. And the Yoga Sutras talk about it. They talk about the mental modifications, the definition. You know, the sutras start out, sutras 1, 2, and 3, very powerful. The first sutra is, now begins the exposition of yoga. So basically, hey, we're starting classes in session, basically is what that's saying. And then the second sutra is a definition of what is yoga. Yoga is the cessation of the modification of mind stuff, chitti. The chitti. That is the awareness, the consciousness, the mind power, so to speak. So he starts off and he says, look, this is how I define the whole thing. It's not so much exercises, although it contains asanas. That's okay. But what is it about? It's about the modification of the ripples in the mind. I love that, because what he's talking about is at the base of our mind, at the root of our mind, is essentially who we are in our soul essence, who we are as a person outside of ego, outside of the body. And he gives an illustration. Patanjali actually in the writings is very brief, but Swami Satchidananda gives an amazing illustration of how this works out. So what are the modifications of the mind stuff? And how can we stop them, or how do they affect us? So he gives a great story. He says, imagine you're a little boy and you hear a knock at the door, and you live with your mom. You've never seen your dad in your life that you can remember. And at the door is standing a man. When you open the door, there's a man standing there. And what does he do? He smiles. He says hello. He welcomes you. He wants to give you a big hug. Because deep down inside, the kid doesn't know it, but this is his dad, but he doesn't know who he is. So the kid runs off to his mom and says, Mommy, there's a strange man at the door. So mom comes to the door, see who it is. And there is her long lost husband, who she embraces with joy and kisses and the whole thing, right? So now that little boy goes from this consciousness, this awareness, this stranger mentality, the strange man at the door. He goes from that consciousness or that mentality to, it's my dad, hugging his dad, kissing his dad, crying, weeping, been longing to meet him, always wanted to see him face to face. Amazing story, because when you think about it, think about how the mind changed this young man's perception. He went from 1 minute thinking, here's a stranger, maybe even danger. My mom told me not to talk to strangers. I don't know who this guy is. He seems really outgoing. He wants to give me a hug. I'm afraid. To, oh my gosh, it's my long lost dad. Think about the differences, chemically that take place in the brain. Think about the bodily differences, like when he opens the door and this stranger's there who wants to show affection, his heart's racing, he's afraid, there's fear. But now everything's changed, and not just in his mind, but in his body. Because see, mind power, or the energy, the chitti, the part of the mind that Patanjali is speaking about in the sutras, it's power. It affects, our very body composition down to the cellular level and what's going to happen in our body. So that's what I mean when I talk about mental modifications. So when Patanjali talks about yoga is, and he gives a definition, the cessation of the modifications of the mind stuff, what he's basically saying is you as a person can actually control reality by your perceptions. Case in point. You think something bad's going to happen. Your heart rate's up. You start stressing. You start nursing it, rehearsing it. This is something that we all deal with, right? You nurse it, you rehearse it, and it never comes to pass. Dang it! How many times has that happened in your life? Probably for the things you've worried about, 99% of the time. Most of the things that we worry about as people never happen, right? So what Patanjali is talking about is the definition of yoga is a very interesting thing, because when we think of yoga in the West, we think of asana, which is okay. I do vinyasa flow 2 or 3 times a week. Yoga is so much more. It's an 8-fold path, which includes meditation, pranayama, breathing, controlling the not only the breath, but controlling the energy flow within the body. But he defines it as the ability for a person to control their own mind. The mental modifications, to be able to stop it, to be able to let it happen, to be able to change it. It's a pretty powerful concept. It's not something that is only unique to the East. This is something that was in the West. Dang it, we missed it. If you were a religious person going to church, you might remember the old proverb that says, as a man thinketh, so is he. That was an old proverb that King Solomon wrote. So it's not foreign to the West, although it is more foreign in practice, because much of the practice that we have in our spirituality in the West doesn't revolve around the basics of mind control, body control. Because see, the mind control is directly related to the body. That's why in the practice, in the 8-fold tree, the practice of Raja Yoga, that's why in that practice we have something very interesting, which is all these practical ways to control the body. That's what the asanas are about, being able to sit Well, when we think of asana, usually we think of like warrior one, warrior two, that's an asana. That's a position. But we also think about sitting still in meditation and quieting the mind. So all these practices in the East kind of lead towards body control, which in turn makes it much easier to control the mind. I don't know if you've noticed, but when I do, if you've done a yoga class in the United States, and maybe it's an hour-long class, okay, 55 minutes, busting your little booty, keep all fit and all that, right? But what happens in the last 2 or 3 minutes? We get to dead man's corpse pose, dead man's pose, Shavasana. And I don't know about you, but have you ever been laying in Shavasana and thought, dang, I would love to can we just stay here for another, hey, I know I'm not supposed to talk and I'm supposed to be dead to the world here, but can we stay here for another 10 or 15 minutes? Yeah. The reason, if you've ever had that inclination, the reason why, there's a good reason why, because a lot of these practices in the East, in the Eightfold Path of Yoga, were geared in order that we could then go into meditation afterwards. So it's really interesting that the key to the mind comes down to body and breath. And then as we begin to control the mind, then everything changes. As a matter of fact, they have a saying in the East. I'm not going to say it. The saying in the West that I mentioned was, as a man thinketh, so is he. That's a proverb, Solomon. In the East, there's a Sanskrit phrase. I'm not even going to try at it because I would butcher the words. But basically, the direct interpretation, or the literal interpretation, would be, as the mind, so the person. As the mind, so the person. Bondage and liberation are in your own mind. So, what's the conclusion? If you feel bound, are you tied down to something? Then you're bound. Are you bound? Then you are. Do you think you're liberated? Then you're free. Like the wonderful movie, The Illusionist, with Ed Norton. I love that movie because in that movie he's walking along and all the kids, the beggar kids, run up to him and they want money, and they know he's a magician, and of course magicians always do coin tricks, right? So they're like, sir, do you have any money? And then he stops and looks at him and he says the most profound thing of the whole movie. If you just watch the whole movie, if you just watch this one scene and got it, this would be enough. This would be fuel for your life. He looked at them and he said, oh, do you think you are poor? I love that. Do you think you're poor? Poverty mindset. Victim complex. I really believe that whatever we think, and this kind of goes into that law of attraction thing, but I'm not going to go into that. But whatever we think, we kind of attract to ourselves. In other words, if we live in victim mentality, like, oh man, every job I've ever had, my boss picks on me, we're going to attract that. And we really tend to bring it out. So if you feel bound, you're bound. If you feel liberated, you're liberated. Things outside of you. Now get this. This is really, really important, because this is Swami Satchidananda's talking about when he's talking about the Yoga Sutras. This is what he says. He says, he goes, things outside you don't bind you or liberate you. Only your attitude towards them does. That's very important to know, because if you have some sort of challenge today, like an addiction of any sort, many addictions, I don't need to run through them. If you have any addiction of any sort, the truth is you're actually not bound. You might be bound in practice because you've had addictions, you've had physical, your body is used to it, so on and so forth. And you've created so many neuro pathways, samskars as they call them in the East, these neuro highways, easy to go back to that addiction because of your neuro pathways. The practices create grooves in your brain, like in a record. I know a lot of you guys are way too young for records, but even CDs, kind of look at the bottom of them, you can kind of see little grooves. Mine's like that, gets grooves in it. And what happens? You know what happens? It gets easy to go back to the hair of the dog, right? So anyway, so if you feel bound, you're bound. Nothing outside you is the thing that actually binds you in and of itself. Think about it, like alcohol, for example. I mean, if you think about it, is it a living entity? Can it actually really do? No, it's all based on choices and practices. Many people have woken up at rock bottom, on the bottom of the rocks, all cut up and bruised, ruined lives, damaged relationships, and they just said enough is enough, and they've never drank again. End of story. Because there's nothing outside you that can bind you or actually even liberate you. It's only your attitude towards these things that affects it. Now, one of the illustrations, well, what about jail, man? Because, you know, we all have known someone or heard of someone who's been in jail, and we know being incarcerated can be a very tough thing. So you said nothing outside you can bind you. Well, what about these guards, these prison guards that keep me in? It's an interesting thing if you think about prisons and you think about incarceration, because in that prison are guards who go home every night, granted, but they come back every day. And, you know, not everyone loves their job, whether you're a graphic designer or whether you're a prison guard, you don't necessarily love your job, but there are a certain amount of people, a lot of people, I think, like their job. I mean, you know, hopefully you don't do it if you don't like it, because if you like it, then work flies by, right? But these prison guards, they go back day after day, and it's a place for them to earn a paycheck. And you know, some of them may hate their job. Maybe in that industry, it's not the best example. Maybe a lot of them don't like it. But the fact is they're as free as they want to be. They come back to that place to work. There's not really much difference if you think about it. I mean, the inmates, yeah, they get bossed around. They have to deal with each other. That's a big difference. But the truth is, you could think about this for a second. You could be in jail. You could be incarcerated. And you could actually be free. Not feel like you got to get out of there or they're holding you hostage in this prison. You could actually be in jail and literally be freer than the prison guards who are working there. Because why? There's nothing outside of you that can actually bind you. The true freedom, the true riches are within. That's the story I said in the beginning from Eckhart Tolle's book, The Beggar on the Box. There were jewels inside and he didn't know it. The true jewels are inside. So here it is. The key, I think one of the biggest keys to life is the ability to control your mind. I mean, think about it. Think about how mind is perception. In that book, in the Yoga Sutras book, the Swami Satchidananda, one of the things he does is he talks about kids who grow up in a family. If you take 5 kids who grew up in a family and you were to interview them, all 5 of them would have a different story of mom and dad and life. And you might have one who's like, oh my gosh, it was great. We lived in a nice house. We were warm and well fed. But then you might talk to someone else who was like, man, it really sucked. You know, dad was always at work and in a bad mood or whatever. That might've been true. But why does that, why, I ask you, why do the 5 different children, when they're interviewed as adults, have 5 different stories and takes on it? Because perception is reality. And where does perception come? It comes in the mind. And I think one of the things that we have to realize is the body, and this is really, really important because we put so much emphasis on body. I mean, I do put a lot of emphasis on body image. We all do. And but there's 2 things we have to realize. One is we are actually not the body. So the body it's like a house, or maybe we should say a tent, because it's kind of temporary, right? It's like a tent we live in for 79 and a half years or whatever. Or maybe, is that the average age of life or is that the retirement age? I can't remember, but anyways, we don't live there forever. And, okay, so the body, we are not the body, and that's important because we identify with the body so closely because the nervous system and everything, because it's all intertwined, we're so attached to it. So we're not the body. And here's the other thing, and this might blow your mind, no pun intended. We are not the mind. That's a huge thing too. Because if you think about, so I look at the mind as like a software program that runs on a computer. It's kind of integrated into the body, the mind is. Think of the body as the computer and the mind as like your operating system that runs on it. Because so the third sutra in Patanjali Sutras, one is, hey, class is in session. Two is definition of yoga, modification, controlling the mind. Three is about the watcher. I love that because you can sit back and watch your mind. And you can soon realize that you don't have to identify with all those thoughts anymore. Even though ego is there and you're hungry and you're scared or you're mad or all those things may be real in a very integrated sense in the human experience. At the same time, you can stand back. Like, okay, case in point. I had a guy the other day said something and I was like, wow, ouch. The old me would have been like, oh, I can't believe you said that. It did. It was like, it wanted to be an ouch, but I kind of stood back and I just observed it and I was like, I don't really identify with that. I just let it go. That's a really important tool to learn in life, especially when it comes to, people just, they say stuff all the time. They just say things, right? They may not even mean it like you think. Perception is huge, right? Might be having a bad day. Didn't really mean it. Just had a bad day. So we observe. We're the watcher. That's what we are. The soul essence, the part of our being that is non-material, is the watcher. So the watcher simply can observe the mind and the body. It's interesting. I used to be a big meat eater, lots of dairy, ice cream all the time. And, I probably wasn't the healthiest person. I think at one point I hit 2. I know it may be hard to believe. I have a picture around here somewhere. I could throw it up, but I'm not going to do it because it's terrible. I was like 220 and it was bad. It's a picture of me golfing. My golf coach was teaching me some things on my swing. And I remember he records it for you, when you finally get it down, he goes, okay, do that again. Then he records it. And then he sent me the video and I was like, crap, that's not, who is that? Oh man, that's me. Fat ass. But anyways, so, not good. So I ate a lot of dairy. I ate lots of meat and greasy fries and stuff like that. So here's what happened. Over time, I had, I'd have heart palpitations and stuff. That's to be expected. I mean, you can have those even if you're not super unhealthy, but I don't really get those things anymore. Hardly ever. And what have I learned though when I do have them now? Used to be when I had them, I'd freak out. I was like, oh my gosh. It was like that. If those of you who are older might remember Sanford and Sons, and that one guy in Sanford and Sons would always, I can't remember his name. It was Red Fox. That was the actor, but he would always say, this is the big one. And that's how I felt. I would get these heart palpitations and I think, oh no, this is it. And then, then of course it would send me into, anxiety. My heart rate would go up because I'm thinking this is the big one. Here it comes. I'm a goner. But here's the thing. I still get them, but not as much, probably because I'm a little bit more fit and eat healthier and all that. But maybe the arteries are a little clearer. Maybe the cholesterol's a little bit lower. I don't know. I don't really care. The thing is, here's the thing. When they come now, I just, I observe them. And what the funny thing is? They don't last as long. I really think what would happen is it might have not even been clogged arteries. It might have just been a regular heartbeat, which happens every once in a while, right? We're human, It's like a car, you take it to the mechanic, you're like, it's that right there. And he's like, well, I heard that, but he goes, it's an idiosyncrasy. It's part of the engine. There's revolutions in an engine, and sometimes it's a little gnarly at times, right? So, but here's what happens. I see, these little irregular heartbeats come in now, little palpitation feeling, and I observe it without emotion. And by golly, those things just come and go like nothing. And it made me wonder, what if nothing's really changed with the heart? But what if what's changed is my interpretation of it? Because before I would get so freaked out, and then my heart would probably race and speed up and, you know, create its own little palpitation storm. I don't know, just a thought. So the mind is powerful, and the body, it's not you. The mind, it's not you. And once you get to that point where you experience that, that's where you really begin to live. I think that's what I feel like for my life. The body, we need food, and, you know, there's certain things we need. You know, you need to hopefully, you know, get out of the rain, you know, warm place to sleep, loving, you know, love from family and friends and partners, whatever. But beyond that, there's something deeper inside of you, and that's the watcher. That's what can watch actually the mind and the processes of the mind. So once you get to that point where you realize that you're actually not the body, not the mind, but a higher being, a soul essence, now you enter into the beginning of what I would call mastery. Because you see, for example, the body, throw things at you like, oh, like you might, let's say you're watching film. I love watching films. And let's say in the film, they're eating pizza. Let's say you've already had dinner, just sitting there. And then you see the pizza. What happens? You see it. Okay, here we're going back to step 1, Sutra 2, which is really the modifications of the mind. So you see the pizza. Before that, you're fine. Weren't thinking anything. You know, weren't even thinking I'm hungry. See the pizza in the movie, think, oh my gosh, that looks amazing. Reminds me of that East Coast pizza place down the street here, like the Brooklyn style pizza or something like that. Next thing you know, your mouth is watering. Okay. Now your stomach's like, okay, give it to me. even though you had a huge dinner, even though you already had a healthy dessert, you're hungry again. Are you really hungry? So this is where the observer, the higher part of you, the soul essence, this is where we begin into self-mastery. We realize we can actually stop those things before we get to the point where the stomach starts rumbling and our mouth starts watering, and we're like, oh, I got it. Because once you get to the point where you're like, I got to get it, and the mouth is watering, it is, you know, I think about that. It's hard to turn the tide at that point, isn't it? It's almost like fevers and fever reducing medication. It's easier to keep a fever down than it is to chase it down with the meds, right? So, and that's the way this process works with the mind. So we get into the observational part of life where we're observing it from the higher self. False self is the lower self. Ego, wants and needs. Need this, wham. Don't like what he said. Can you believe they said that? What about the mind? It'll actually go, well, have you ever had an argument with someone? They go, well, you're like, I didn't say that. And they go, well, that's what you wanted to say. Have you ever had an argument in your mind with someone that you know, you think that they're going to get mad at you for something? And of course they're not thinking that, but then you're already going through what your defense will be. Oh my gosh, this has got to stop. It's like you have an entity within you that is insane, right? I mean, I only say this from personal experience. I'm not, that's the thing. I used to be a preacher and I used to like point the finger at people. I don't do that anymore. I can't condemn people for stuff like that. I'm in the same boat. But if I found any progress in my life, which I have, I'm not there yet. It's not totally smooth seas. It's just, you know, not as bumpy. There's hurricanes past. I'm just trying to help. So the observer, okay, so here's what happens. Now life begins to be a little fun. Okay, I'll give you an example. Well, first of all, the game of life. In the East, they have a term for it. It's the Leela. This is actually a term. It's a term in the East, in spirituality. It's kind of the game of life. I'm going to give you a case in point. You have a boss. Let's say you go through this spiritual awakening, some sort of like Holy Ghost induction, Kundalini rising, call it whatever you want, Nirvana experience, big awakening. A lot of us have had them. They come in phases, right? Kind of scary sometimes. They can create a psychological challenge. But let's just say you have a boss. Go through this awakening and you realize, you know, my boss, the reason why he gets down on me is not because he doesn't like me personally. He's just got issues, right? You finally realize that. It's like the cop who pulls you over and you didn't do anything wrong. And he's like, you know, the reason why that particular cop is in that job is because he likes busting people. You know, when he goes home, he's going to bust his wife's chops over something, right? So once you realize it's not personal, once you realize that people are doing and saying things because of it's their own deal, it's their own concept of life or inadequacy. It might be that they think they're better than you, so they always have to prove you wrong. When I was in your job, I did it right, so you got to do it right. Okay, so some bosses do that. But once you realize this is kind of like a game, kind of like a movie, now you get to play the game of life. This is actually kind of cool. It might sound crazy, but I've had an argument or two where I was like, oh my gosh, this is the game. And you're like, yeah, yeah. People can sense when you're not really into into it, like when you're not captivated by the grand delusion. When you figure out, oh my gosh, I'm living in the Matrix. This is not really, it's real, but it's not. This problem, this discussion I'm having with this person right now, they're unhappy. They are unhappy. I just happen to be in their life, or I'm in their life path. Oh my gosh. It changes everything. Now it's a shift. I always was fascinated when I watch a film and I see a psychologist helping a patient. What I'm fascinated with is the techniques of these therapists and how a lot of times they can't come out and say, look, the problem you have is you have a lifelong trauma with your mom or your dad. They don't oftentimes say that. A lot of times what they do is they guide people to the truth gently. It's like taking a little child by the arm. So why do you think you felt that way when your boss said that? Oh, does it remind you of anything? Oh, it reminds you of your dad, huh? Okay. What are they trying to do? They're trying to gently lead you to the realization of these mental constructs, these things that aren't necessarily real, but you're playing them out over and over again in life. That's what we do. And like in relationships, that's a very common thing. He or she sabotaged the relationship. Why did they do that? Life issues, mental constructs. And then, so we're playing the Leela, the game of life. It's almost like a movie I saw once. You might remember it. It was a Jennifer Gardner movie. It's a great flick. It's 13 Going on 30. I love that film. She's so good in that. It's kind of like a nice time travel movie, kind of romantic comedy, time travel, which combines my two favorite things. And at one point in the movie, Jennifer Gardner's character, I'm trying to think of her name, can't think of it now, is having a discussion with the antagonist. And she says, well, which part do you want to play now? You want to be the pot or the kettle? And I thought about that and I thought, that is really insightful. That is really insightful. What part do you want to play? Do you want to be the angry boss? Okay, I'll be the afflicted employee. But here's the thing. No one can bind you. Once you figure this out, once you really, really get it, you won't get sucked in to the vortex of the Matrix. You can stay in your happy place, the golden space, nirvana, seated in heavenly places. That's what it's about. I'm only here for one reason. I'm here to share this really simple but powerful message that the mind is the key. The mental constructs are what we're talking about here. The mental constructs are not really real. Your perception becomes your experienced reality. How you perceive things will be your freedom or your imprisonment. Your bliss is underneath the surface of all those mind layers. Once you get the mind modifications under control, you'll begin to be able to stare into a sunset without thinking about what you have to do tomorrow. What needs to, those things, they have their place. I'm not saying you don't, but you can stare in towards a sunset and just have gratitude flowing from your heart and realize that you are alive in the present moment. There's nothing better than awakening to right now without a need for anything. Your soul essence doesn't need a thing. The soul, the true essence of who you are, is that part that we all have. And that part can never be harmed, can never die. You can lose it, like you lose a sock, but ultimately you don't really lose it. It's there. It's the illusion of loss. That's why, in organized religion, when they say, oh, it's a lost soul, I'm like, yeah, but no. They forgot who they were. But that's not permanent. Modifications of the mind stuff. Get a hold of the body. I'm thankful. This has been a very cool little talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Back after about a 4 to 6, can you believe it? 4 to 6 weeks when I was out. I had a little bug, got better, had a little bug again, but now I'm good. I'm here. And we're taking it to the next level. We're going to go big time. I'm going to have my friend Brian's going to come into studio, and we're going to continue the series on why I left organized religion, part 2. Oh my gosh, this is going to be a good one. Part 2, which is, what's the subject? Judgmentalism. Oh my gosh. I know it sounds kind of not too fun to listen to, but it's something we need to talk about. You don't have to listen to it. You can listen to another one. I'm going to continue on the Course in Miracles series. I have interviews lined up with beautiful people. So thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for subscribing. If you're a YouTube listener, go down to the channel and click subscribe and set your alerts to always, if you want to make sure you don't miss a spot. If you're a Facebook Live person, make sure you like the Streams of Light podcast page. And if you're a Twitch person, I'd love to have you follow me. I'm new on Twitch. This is like my second, Twitch time. I know it's mostly gamers or like hot chicks sitting in their bedroom with like essential oils and candles and everything and dress real nice. But I thought, why not try it? Maybe there's a place for me on Twitch. Even good old Chris Anthony. So make sure you do that. Send a shout out, chat to me. I'm always looking for interesting guests. You have an idea for a podcast you want to get on? That's something we can do too. So keep in touch. Streams of Light Podcast. I'm Chris Anthony.